Hello and welcome to Continuing Clockwise, a channel about games, gamers, and gaming. I'm Chad. So this week we're going to start off with one big DM tip, and then I'm going to roll from there into a debrief from my recent Dungeons & Dragons session for my long-running 5th edition campaign. I suggest that you watch the previous debrief episodes first. I think you'll enjoy this a little bit more, but if you don't, here's a quick recap. We're entering the final stages of a 4-year campaign that started back mostly with Hoard of the Dragon Queen, though I've infused plenty of homebrew content at every step of the way. About 2 years ago, I pivoted the campaign into the Out of the Abyss kind of plot line, and then I've been using the Princes of the Apocalypse mega dungeon and a lot of the characters and a lot of the content from there as well during this final stage. That's the home base for the Judge, and the Judge is my campaign's main antagonist. At this stage, the party needs to sneak into the Judge's base and steal his grimoire. And then Viseron from Out of the Abyss is going to use that grimoire along with some other components to summon these rampaging demon lords that the Judge has summoned into a common location. The demon lords will then fight each other, and then the player characters will take out the last weakened survivor. At some point, they also need to take out the Judge himself to prevent other nonsense and shenanigans that the Judge is prone to do. At the end of the last session, the players had just taken out Vanifer, one of the Judge's main lieutenants, and a red dragon. I was under the impression that they were going to continue on and to kill the Judge and steal the grimoire all at the same time. So one of the things that they have is the Judge's true name, and I've let them know that that's a major advantage that they will have against the Judge when they finally fight him. These last two sessions were actually pretty close together, which is good relative to this campaign. We typically play about once a month, and then with busy schedules that can stretch out, which is not optimal. Unfortunately, 2 of my player characters couldn't make it to this session, but I had plenty of advance warning. They were really good about letting me know, so I could prepare. This time I decided to use slimmed down versions of their characters and keep them with the party. So normally, and this is kind of my half DM tip, normally if players can't make it, their characters I just hand wave away the availability of their characters. They just aren't there. I've just found that the more excuses you make, the more work you do, the more irritating and annoying and disruptive it is. So normally I just hand wave it. However, we're nearing the end of the campaign. These are high level creatures that they're fighting. The Judge is very powerful. His lieutenants are very powerful. If they lose 2 out of their 5 characters for just the combat strength alone, I would either have to nerf the Judge and nerf the lieutenants, which would not be very satisfying, or the players then would be so underpowered there'd be no chance of them succeeding at that combat, which is then gonna stretch out the campaign. So that was my reason for going on this route, and I'm gonna talk to you more about here in a second. Essentially, what I decided to do, and here's the tip, is to convert the player characters into non-player characters. And the purpose of these characters, and it's really important to focus on purpose first here. The purpose is to provide an analogous level of damage output, armor class, hit points as a similarly powered player character. And it's best if you can do that while maintaining some of the flavor from that original character. It's equally important to remove any extra complexity. It's fine if this character is not as good, and I would expect that. This character shouldn't be as good as the player character. So here are the steps that I follow when I decide to go this route. Step 1 is to begin with the sheet of the character that you're trying to replicate. If you don't have that, there's a really cool chart in the Dungeon Master's Guide on page 274 that if you're trying to create monsters, that gives you the stats. So that's also a good reality check just to refer to when you're doing this process. Remember that the damage output is per round, and most player characters have multiple ways of damaging monsters within the same round. So fighters get several attacks, rogues get their attack, but they also get sneak attack, so it's not going to be exactly the same, but it'll give you an idea. The second step is to just keep the same armor class, keep the same hit points, and keep the same weapon modifier, attack modifiers for their main weapons. Step 3 is to just keep any of the passive racial or class abilities. Since those numbers are baked in, you don't have to think about it, you may as well just roll it over. Step 4 gets a little more complicated because here you strip away anything that's excessively fidgety. Again, you have to balance this with keeping any of the iconic things with that character. This is particularly tricky with casters. So if you have a high-level wizard or high-level druid, having that entire spell list is what I would consider fidgety. What are the main combat spells and maybe a utility spell or two that character typically uses? Just keep those and peel away the rest. Step 5 is to assign a player to run the character. You're also going to reserve the right to veto any actions that seem out of character, or if you just need that character to perform a certain way for whatever reason, you have that right. Typically, when I DM, I don't have player characters behave according to my wishes. That's something I would never do. But in this case, it's technically going to be a non-player character that you're just assigning a player to run. Some things to keep in mind is the player who you're assigning to run that other character already running a fairly simple character? Are they kind of knowledgeable and familiar and comfortable with the rules of 5th edition already? And are they a person who's already a pretty quick decision maker? The more of those factors that you can align, the better off and the more fun it'll be. The other choice here is to just run the character yourself. It's one more thing for a complicated combat that you'll have to do, but you're already running monsters, so adding one more isn't necessarily that bad of a thing. It's up to you. It was a fighter and a rogue that I had to create non-player character versions for. The fighter was the easiest. It was a Battlemaster fighter, and I stripped away the maneuvers. I kept everything else the same, and that was fun. The rogue was a little trickier. I didn't have the original character sheet on hand when I sat down to make this conversion, so I used that table as a starting point, and I essentially reconstructed the character just fairly quickly, as quickly as I could, from ground up, from level 1 all the way up. So I started with the standard array of scores. Every time they had an ability score advancement, I made sure to max out the dexterity, and I made sure that sneak attack was something that carried over, since that's really iconic for rogues. I adjusted the saving throws as seemed appropriate, and it was good to go. That was the tip. Now I'm going to start talking about the session itself. So if you are playing in my campaign, you should stop this video for now and take a look at it in a few months after we've wrapped up our campaign. My prep focused on two main things. One was how was I going to disrupt their long rest? I firmly believed at the time that they had every intention of trying to long rest in this dungeon, and I knew they had some resources, and I mentioned this in the last video. The second part of my prep really involved focusing on what I expected to be the combat encounters. I've said this, I think, several times on this channel. High-level combat encounters in D&D 5th edition are complicated. There's a lot of abilities, there's a lot of spells to watch out for. And so I spent a lot of time with those stats and kind of thinking about a cool, creative way to make those encounters fun. Then it turned out the resting was not a problem. I think I hadn't been listening that closely to what the players were planning. They made no attempt to do that. But for the encounters, I hatched a cool plan that I am quite proud of that I'll share with you now. With the Vanifer defeated, Vanifer was the Prince of Fire, I decided that the Weeping Colossus, which is really this really cool combat area, really fantastic location, where lava comes out of this stone giant, and not stone giant like the monster, but literally out of stone. It's this colossus. It's not sentient at all. Anyway, so it's got lava, coming out of its eyes, and I decided that would convert to water, and what that would then transform this chamber into a multi-elemental area. So it would really be a showdown with the remaining elemental princes and the judge versus the players. What I had happen was the 3 remaining lieutenants were transforming this area into something, very profoundly different. But, and don't tell my players this, one of the remaining princes was disguised as the judge. And so in play, the player characters, I think Frictor sent his owl. He has an owl familiar that's very good at scouting ahead, or it might have been Gimlet, who's the rogue thief, who does a lot of scouting too. So I think between the two of them, they both scouted at different times. They saw this, they saw the whole thing, and instead of going after the judge, they decided to avoid that whole thing and go in and just go for the grimoire, not to go for the kill. They did believe the deception, though. They just didn't take the bait. Shortly thereafter, hit another little snag. I had designed this other additional section of the dungeon where it was really the judge's kind of private chambers. I had designed that whole thing, several months ago, maybe even a year. I had the notebook page, and I had these kind of traps that were really cool, and I'd actually spent a fair amount of time, designing that. And I couldn't understand my own notes during the session. So I had to recreate some of that on the fly. Structurally, it was fine, but there were some of the damages or something it turned out fine, but it was this moment of confusion that I really would have rather not have experienced. So 2 of the player characters snuck all the way in to this library area that the judge has his notes and his grimoire. They grabbed the grimoire, they grabbed a bunch of other journals and books of the judge, and just as they were about to leave, the judge himself, not the disguised lieutenant, but the judge himself, found them and blocked their exit. And so right out of the gate, the players were really ambivalent about this. They didn't decide whether to go all in and to go for it or to flee. It never seemed to occur to them to invoke that true name in order to weaken him and to really give them a chance. So they were facing a CR 20-something. Devil was the stats that I had, and was using full bore. And so almost immediately, using legendary actions, the judge banished over half the party, 3 of the 5 characters. And shortly after that, he nailed Arinya. Arinya's a tiefling bard, with like a 50 points or something damage from like a hex bolt. Didn't kill her, didn't put her down, but it shook her and scared them a little bit. So at this point, they were clearly in escape mode. So I think they did a really good job. My players did. I think they used Dispel Magic, like a cranked up version of Dispel Magic, to get to unbanish the other 3 characters, and then they teleported out of there like immediately. I used Counterspell. I tried, I did everything I could, but it was just the judge by himself, so he didn't have that many actions, even taking full advantage of his legendary actions. So they escaped fairly cleanly. The lieutenants did follow, but again, they got to hand it to my players. They did a good job and got some lucky rolls. So they did a good, smart job of evading, of getting out of there. They worked within the constraints that I had. I didn't really break the rules, or I tried to keep it logically consistent. So they escaped. Then they returned to Vizeron, gave him their grimoire, which really completed one of the major quest lines from this campaign. They had already returned most of the other components to him a while before. And I have to admit, I wasn't super pleased with my own narration and my own role-playing and the way I had this set up. With Vizeron, I've always... Part of the problem is that Vizeron has been a little tacked on in my campaign, because I didn't use a lot of Out of the Abyss that he's connected to. So there's this whole section about Mesobaranzan and the Drow that's in that module that I just didn't use because I was homebrewing or just doing other things. No big deal. It went fine, but it's just one of those things that I was dissatisfied with. Yeah, the next big decision is, where is Vizeron going to do the ritual? Where are the demon lords going to be summoned to? And that's important because there's going to be a major conflict. That's a big deal. It's going to be a lot of chaos and destruction. And the player characters didn't really have a preference. I think they suggested somewhere in the Underdark, just a random location in the Underdark, which could be fine. I think this is an opportunity for me to really be creative and think of some cool stuff. Maybe a switcheroo of some kind. I think Vizeron needs to have a little bit of not quite a betrayal, but maybe a half betrayal. Again, I'm not quite sure yet, but I need a little something just so it's not boring and linear. At the same time, I don't want to add time complexity. So I've been watching a stream, actually Zobmi's stream, who's also a player in my campaign, where he's playing Skyrim. And one of the great things about Skyrim, the PC game, is that almost every quest you go on, especially the named ones, there's some sort of switcheroo. There's some sort of weird thing that happens near the end, or someone's got, hidden agendas or something. And it's not a big deal, and it doesn't seem obvious, but it just adds a little more level of interest and makes it more fun. So that's what I'm going to be shooting for. I'm not sure what that looks like yet. And frankly, I could use your ideas. So let me know in the comment section, what do you think I should do with Vizeron and all this? That's kind of a switcheroo, that's fun, doesn't add too much time, or, all that stuff I just talked about. If you have other feedback also, leave it all in the comment section. I really would appreciate that. As usual, if you liked this video, please click the like button. Consider subscribing to my channel. I can be reached on Twitter here, as you can see, and then I also have a Facebook group that you can join me at. And that's that. Until next week, game great.